Last August, the World Health Organization chief made an impassioned appeal for the attacks on aid and healthcare workers to stop, saying this has become a new normal around the world. He cited the fact that emergency responders, doctors, their patients all massacred. Sometimes entire hospitals were destroyed. Since then, still from Khartoum to Goma to Kiev and of course Gaza, that unwritten and written rule in the Geneva Conventions to have some human decency and not murder healthcare workers has gone unheeded. The attacks continue in what has become another example of international norms being violated, a world order falling apart. They just don't seem to care. So what to do? Well, our guest today is a healer, a storyteller, and a frontline witness to carnage. Saleyha Ahsan is a humanitarian doctor, journalist, and a former British Army captain who served with NATO in Bosnia. She's seen the worst of the worst in Bosnia and other conflict zones like Libya and Syria. On this episode of the InnerView, we'll get to know Saleyha Ahsan, hear about her experiences, and find out what she makes of this total lack of accountability the world over. And I'll ask her if, after everything she's seen close up, if she still has any hope in humanity. And Dr. Saleyha Ahsan joins us now from Cambridge. Really good to have you on the program, ma'am. I've watched a lot of your interviews. In one of your most recent ones, you said it seems as if the world has gone bonkers. Tell me why.
Well, what we've got right now is a number of attacks almost on a daily basis. I mean, I check my phone every morning wondering what's happened overnight, where there are countless acts against humanity, countless acts of aggression against entities that are traditionally protected under international humanitarian law. And not just that, but by social norms. There are things like attacks against healthcare, attacks against medics, against hospitals, ambulances, against patients that we do, for a reason, find unpalatable. But these events are happening with impunity almost on a daily basis, and even being enabled in some cases because of the flow of weapons and finances to the perpetrators. I really am concerned about the direction of travel of this, because I think that if we don't, and I say the collective we, I would say the we of those people in power, in leadership of countries that are signatories to the standards and the norms, if they do not step in and take action, that they too will be vulnerable to such incidents. Then no one is safe. I think the level of impunity is just mind-blowing. It's really shocking. When is this going to suddenly, I keep thinking, when is the thing going to happen that's going to make everyone think, right, well, that's too much now. That's absolutely too much. But there appears to be no line now, absolutely no line.
What advice would you give to a young doctor, for example, who wants to volunteer in Gaza right now?
Well, you know, so I worked as a medical volunteer when I was quite junior in 2002, 2003 in Nablus during the Second Intifada, and I felt able to go at that point. Yes, it was hostile. Yes, it was very tense. Yes, we were shot at, but I think it was at that point, and I remember talking about it when I came back, that it gave shock and it gave horror, and to the people that heard, and it felt like there was, it felt more unthinkable at that time than it is now. Now, I would say, really consider why you're going, really, really consider. If you're a young junior doctor, I wouldn't. I would say don't go anyway. You know, there's nothing that you can bring that they don't have already. The expertise, the skill set, the exponential learning curve that the healthcare workers in Gaza have had to unfortunately learn. I mean, they're having to do the unthinkable without hardly any equipment. I mean, the stories are horrendous, and they should make everyone balk and you know, really, really consider what's going on very strongly. I would say to the experienced doctors that are going out, you have my utter respect, and you know, and everyone will thank them for it. But they are very vulnerable to attack. So really, really think through every single aspect of it. I've also deployed to hostile environments in a journalism capacity, and we have to go on our hostile environments training. You have to take your flak jacket, you have to take your helmet, carefully marked with press. Do we have to provide the same flak jackets and helmets now to healthcare workers who would normally traditionally go in with a Red Cross or Red Crescent armband, and that should have protected them? The whole thing needs to be rethought.
No, I appreciate you sharing those insights, and that's good advice.
And I also think for the junior doctors that are here, I would say your role lies elsewhere. It's a really important role. Your role lies in advocacy and in lobbying, because this is happening in our time. You know, in the 1800s, there was a day that invoked the Solferino spirit. You know, Henry Dunant witnessed something horrific, 30,000 service personnel killed, a lot of suffering. Medical volunteers that were rushing in to try to help the wounded were being shot at, but they were unmarked. No one knew that they were volunteers rushing in to help the wounded. And that spurred him on to consider how to protect these brave people that were going in to help the injured. Well, we seem to have turned full circle now. And what would he say today if he was with us now? That those that do rush in to help and are wearing the Red Cross or the Red Crescent emblem are actually now looked for in a sniper's sights, or in a drone with a drone operator sitting somewhere comfortably far away. They are now being looked at to be taken out. When are we going to find that Solferino spirit again and invoke it? Because if we don't, then I think we are really going to be noted in this point in history down the line, that we were the generation that let it happen.
Yeah, it's happening on our watch. And I want to step back for a second now and rewind a bit to the very beginning of your journey. And so it's not very common for a British Muslim woman to join Sandhurst, to be a part of the military. You were deployed to Bosnia, and that was part of the NATO mission there. What do you think was the sort of fundamental essence of that experience, and how much did that shape you, your experience in the Balkans at that time?
Crucially so, absolutely crucially. It was in the 1990s. I was watching, you know, the news unfolding of what was going on in Bosnia, and I think again it was a Muslim population that was under, you know, the most horrific assault and attack. There was an ethnic cleansing taking place in front of our eyes. I remember my father watching it and saying, and that was the first time he actually revealed that he too had lived a refugee life. It was the first time he disclosed it. My father was a child of partition, and I think I will never forget that moment watching the news with him. And he said, "Oh, I remember, you know, when I was a child, we had periods like that, not knowing if we were going to live or die." And I think that was a huge moment for me. And I suppose I was drawn to the military from a young age. I'd been involved in cadets. I think it was more of a, could I do it? Did I have it in me? I liked sport. I liked working in teams. I liked the military way of life. It made sense to me, the command and the structure. and a life of discipline, and working to a common goal. And my first job was in journalism, and I trained as a journalist, but I left journalism when I got a place at Sandhurst. And for me, that was the start of the journey. That's been the start of the journey of where I am today. My whole sort of career has revolved around the issue of healthcare and armed conflict. When I joined the army, when I was commissioned out of Sandhurst, for me, I didn't realise that people like me didn't go. I that wasn't really my thing. I just knew that I wanted to go, and I wanted to see if I could do it. And it was only when I was in that I found out that I don't think they'd had any other British Muslim women there before, and that was fine, and it didn't matter. It didn't matter who you were. All you had to do was, all they were worried about, and all we were worried about, was could we pass the fitness test in the allotted time? Could we do what was expected of us as an officer cadet to pass out of Sandhurst? And then I was inspired to join the Royal Army Medical Corps as a medical support officer. And that was for a number of reasons, but primarily because of the fact that very junior officers were being deployed to Bosnia, to the Balkans almost immediately after finishing Sandhurst, and I thought that's what I want to go. And it was a huge moment for me. It's imprinted, it feels like just yesterday, because the lessons learned are still with me, and they will always be with me, and they direct me. I remember wearing a Red Cross emblem on my uniform. It was part of I was a non-medical support officer, so I wasn't a doctor. I had no medical knowledge, but all of my troops were combat medic technicians. And so we all wore the Red Cross emblem because we were in the medical corps. Our ambulances, our vehicles, our Land Rovers, where we live. I was stationed in Gorny Vakuf and then in Shipovo in the Republic of Srpska, had Red Crosses all over them. I remember and I reflect moving really safely, feeling very comfortable, going around, travelling around, and also the reception that you got within a community when you pulled up in a green vehicle, clearly a military vehicle, but it had the emblem on the side of it. I have been trying really hard to remember if there was hostility, and there was none. And I've been trying hard to remember the reception. It was warm. It was, there was trust on both sides. And then I left. I left to study medicine because I was so inspired by the work of medics in the military. The ambition had been to be a medic in the army. So I had to leave to retrain. But whilst I was a civilian for the first time in 10 years, because I'd been military for 10 years, when I became a civilian, the very first thing I did was go to Palestine. So I'm going to go to the country that I wouldn't normally be allowed to if I was still serving. So I went to Kashmir first, then I went the Indian side, and then I went to, and that was pre 9/11, and then I went to Palestine and made a documentary about healthcare workers with Mustafa Barghouti, who is leadership in Palestine now, about the movement of Palestinian medics under curfew during the Second Intifada. And I made a documentary called Article 17, Doctors in Palestine. And it was at that moment, and bear in mind, I had really only been a civilian for about a year or a year and a half. I was still very much used to being the one in green with a weapon, having soldiers around me. So going as a civilian into a heavily militarized zone where I was a civilian, I didn't have all of that infrastructure. I remember how vulnerable and exposed you felt. But I thought, and I remember I interviewed Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, and I said, how do you deliver healthcare? And he said, look, we get shot at. And when I'm talking about 2002, and for me, I would have thought, crikey. And they showed me the ambulances with bullet holes in them. And then I witnessed it. I was standing with a team, with Dr. Mustafa Barghouti's team. They were clearly marked as medics. And then it took me a minute or two. My reflexes were really slow, considering I'd just left the army. I heard a popping sound. I would never have thought for a second that we were being shot at, but we were. I saw the doctors hit the ground. I got it on tape. I've got the footage. And then they hit the deck and we had to, try and escape. And that was 2002. And I thought, crikey, I've witnessed something and I've caught it on camera and this is going to shock everyone. And it did actually. It did. The film did well. It went around a lot of film festivals and screened on cinemas, and lots of discussions about it, even went to Cannes. And I think it really, really shocked people. But where are we now?
Yeah. I want to ask you particularly about Syria, especially given the fog of war, especially since you're both a healer, a doctor, and a storyteller, a witness to atrocities, but also in the mix with the people. You've spoken previously about the bombing on a school in Syria and the children that were bombed, and you were there. And especially with regards to Syria, such a divisive conflict at the time when people were saying, well, Assad didn't do it, maybe the rebels did it to themselves, oh no, they didn't barrel bomb here, they didn't use chemical weapons there. Tell me what that meant to you as both somebody there and a storyteller, the responsibility to speak the truth and tell the world what you saw and experienced.
Yeah, 2013, we were in a hospital. We thought that we were the target. Clearly, I think the current trajectory of attacks against healthcare in the scale that they've been happening, a little bit started in Libya, but went on to another level in Syria. I mean, from day one, hospitals are being taken out at an industrial scale. So there was clearly a plan. But I think, I think the day that incident happened, when a Soviet-made thermal bomb fell on a school in Atarib, in just outside, outskirts of Aleppo, it was shocking when the news happened, when it happened and the patients came in. Shocking is an understatement. It was horrendous. Up to 30 children, 28 children badly burned, with severe burns, a paediatric mass casualty situation. In a hospital setting, it was a makeshift hospital. It wasn't a formal hospital, so with limited equipment, and trying to manage that mass casualty situation with the basics of what you had. We did our best on the day. We tried. It happened. It was real. The flashbacks that I'm having right now, speaking to you, are very real. The children that suffered them were real, but you were a witness to it. Not all of those children survived. Some of them are on the film, the BBC Panorama, Saving Syria's Children. You saw them. You spoke to them. They told you in how much agony that they were in. You learned that they died a few days later of their injuries. I followed some of them into Turkey. And by the way, I saw the incredible work that Turkey did with these patients. And I was a witness to that. I was a witness to the healthcare that was inside Syria. And then that was destroyed. It was an emergency response. It had limited equipment. Remember, this was a time where Assad wasn't even letting humanitarian aid in. So I saw patients, and some of these were my patients, being evacuated out, painful journeys across Syria to get to the Turkish border. And then you would witness these incredible, they were like ambulances that I would be used to seeing here in Cambridge, fully kitted out, as you would expect of an ambulance that's a critical care ambulance that's arriving to take a horrendously injured, critically, severely injured patient to a hospital. You didn't see that inside Syria because they didn't have them. You saw it on the border. And then I followed the patients to Gaziantep, to a unit in Gaziantep, and saw the care that they were having there. And the unit was absolutely full of burned Syrian patients. I've never seen anything like it. And again, that's a story that I carry with me. I don't think it was heard of enough. But anyway, that's one of the stories. And I think when I got back to the UK, I think the thing that we realised, yes, we did our best on the day. Yes, we didn't have everything we would love to have, to be able to have done absolutely everything in that spot in Syria. But what we could do is we could speak about it. Again, we thought it was a moment in horror. I thought it was something that we had witnessed. A bomb on a school, and this is what a bomb on a school looks like, what it sounds like, what it smells like. These are the lives affected. We all thought collectively as a team that we'd witnessed something that might change minds about this war, but it didn't. But what did happen was the attack against us continued. I was accused, me personally, of dressing children up to look like burns victims because, and I saw some of the arguments, because she's ex-military, she knows how to dress up patients and look like casualties. So she macro simulated the whole thing. I mean, for a start, macro simulation is a really complicated thing to do. It's not something that you can just do because you've got a bit of paint in your bag. It's a really complicated exercise. So no, I didn't macro simulate. And then we dismissed those because we thought people will see that that's just a load of rubbish. But it gained traction, and it grew and it grew and grew, and more people believed it. And the attacks against us continued because I think that indicated how serious an event that was. Because if it was considered an incident that wasn't that serious, of course they wouldn't have put in whoever they were. I wouldn't have put in all of that effort to try to discredit us.
Right.
But because it was a high value incident that rightly would have shocked everyone, they attacked it, and they attacked it for a number of years.
That's really,
to discredit it.
There's just so many levels to this.
That was the one thing. That was the one thing I'll say. Yes, it was horrendous.
Yeah.
Yes, it was horrendous to be there. But what was continued, the pain of that, and I'm intact, nothing happened to me physically, but psychologically you felt that you were failing your patients because voice, and you were failing to convince everyone that this happened. And it didn't just affect me, it affected all of us.
Right.
We were all really shocked and challenged by that. And I think what we were challenged by was how easy that was for them to do unchallenged. And so there are really many ways that healthcare is attacked. Physically, I even had people reporting me to the General Medical Council in the UK, claiming that I'd lied and I'd made up a whole incident. It was bizarre. But, the reason they were doing that was because they knew that that they'd done something horrendous.
Saleyha, I hate to be that guy. I mean, this has been tremendous and very, very powerful. I still didn't even get to ask you how you still keep any hope in humanity if you do. And maybe we'll save that for the next time we talk. We'll have a more philosophical discussion. But this has been really worthwhile, and I really appreciate you sharing your stories and your expertise. Dr. Saleyha Ahsan, thank you for joining us on the interview.
Thank you for having me.
Take care.
Bye.